Hi, it's Ashleigh from Sweet Dreams Bake Shop, and welcome back to my channel where I make a lot of cake and cookie decorating tutorials as well as give a lot of baking business tips. So I am going to be making that video that I promised you guys a little while ago, all about flooding and piping your cookies with the same type of icing consistency. But in this tutorial, we're actually going to more be focusing on the different designs that I'm going to be doing for this engagement set. So for this first little bit here, I am using the same pipe and flood consistency, which means it's not a different outlining consistency. It's the type of consistency that can stay on there without flooding over. My basic royal icing recipe that I like to use is 1 cup of powdered or icing sugar mixed with 1 tablespoon of meringue powder and as much water as needed. And I always say as much water as needed instead of giving you an exact measurement because other people like to work with different types of consistencies, so you really just have to find what works for you. You will notice that I am bringing out my pipe and flood consistency pretty close to the edge here because I have full confidence that this icing is not going to flood over. I also use tipless piping bags, especially for when I'm doing the pipe and flood portion. I just find that I can get a flow that's a lot quicker, and when I use piping tips, it seems to take a lot longer. Plus, I do sometimes end up with curling with certain types of tips, so this way I avoid any clogs and I can go a lot faster. This particular cookie here is going to be a champagne bottle, and I'm going to do a crackly effect, which I'm going to show you later on in the video, but that means that I'm only going to do this portion for now, and I will fill in the rest later on. After finishing all of the base icing, I'm going to pop these in the oven at 175 degrees Fahrenheit just to dehydrate that top layer so that I can work with it and put more layers on top without things bleeding into one another. Now here comes the fun part. Now you don't want to do this technique when it's fully dry because then it won't work. So again, this is why we just kind of make sure that the top is a little bit matte and it's no longer shiny. That's how we know it's ready. If you dry it too much, this can be really tricky to do this. I'm using a little balling tool, which I mostly use on fondant, but if you don't have a balling tool, you could use a chopstick or a spoon. Really anything will work. It really is dependent on how big of kind of crevices and cracks that you want to create. So I'm using the smaller side for these smaller bottles, but when I was using it for the circles, I used my larger side because I wanted larger cracks and crevices. You want to let those dehydrate one more time so that they're going to be hard enough if you want to paint on them. Of course, if you just want to leave them, you don't have to dehydrate, but that is highly recommended if you want to paint them. Now I'm going in with this pipe and flood consistency. This is technically a navy blue. I know it looks a little bit light. If you want to get that true navy color, you do want to make sure that you put in a lot of colorant and you let it rest for a little bit. As we all know, colors saturate more over time. I'm actually showing you a little bit of a fail here. I wasn't going quick enough, so those sprinkles did not stick as well as they should have. If you really want to create a nice really thick sprinkle on there, definitely get that on before you get a matte finish on your cookie. I was actually making several cookie sets at once when I was doing these cookies, so my friend had painted this for me using a little bit of vodka and luster dust. Unfortunately, she didn't get all of the little cracks and crevices, mainly because I think I added too much vodka to the luster dust, so I'm just going back over and airbrushing it a little bit to fill in those gaps. And these are going to be little champagne glasses. I know technically I think they're wine glasses, so it's all good. We're going to add in that color there, and then we're going to add in these details. I wanted to do a lot of clean line work on these cookies. The trickiest part of the whole set was probably these engagement ring cookies. I think it's because it's just really tricky to get this nice and circular. If you wanted to be really perfect with this, what I would do is I would go with a cookie cutter and just kind of trace it first and then do your lines on it. Or you can always whip out your projector, and then that way you know the lines are going to be clean as well. But since there was only 2 of these engagement rings that I was going to pipe, I decided to do it free-handed. Now, if you get intimidated by doing straight lines, again, notice how much I'm actually pulling up that piping bag. The tip is actually quite far away from the cookie. One of the biggest mistakes I see beginner cookiers making is dragging their piping tip through their work. Of course, you're never going to be able to get a straight line that way. It's very tricky. So again, with fonts and scripts like this, it really is just a series of straight lines. So once you nail straight lines, you're really going to be able to do quite a bit. I should also mention that yes, this is a completely different consistency. This is thickened up quite a bit. So I always add a little bit more meringue powder than I do icing sugar. That way I get a nice fluffy consistency that's not too hard on my hands. If you're finding when you're piping that it's too hard on your hands and they're really, really hurting, it really shouldn't be hurting at all. I used to think that it was normal for your hands to be very fatigued after piping, but once I learned that the consistency can be nice and smooth, but it can also be thick enough to pipe these details without hurting your hands, then I was much, much better, and my stamina for piping was also much better as well. So just now I mentioned thick piping consistency that's smooth, and what I mean by that is occasionally if you add too much icing sugar instead of the meringue powder, you're going to end up with something really, really chalky, and then you won't be able to do things like this script writing, for example. This consistency is smooth enough that I can make script out of it, but I'm also going to be able to pipe leaves and different petals later on in the video as well. So when I first started decorating cakes and cookies, this type of script really wasn't that popular at all. It was much more popular to have really straight writing and consistent lettering. But actually this script is very, very easy to do because it allows you to keep things straight without having to keep things straight. You'll notice that the more that you actually study the way that this script looks. Also, a little tip when you are doing writing like this, make sure that your piping bag isn't too full. It's really hard to have consistency, and it's also hard to maintain control when that icing bag is very, very full. When I first started coming up with lettering that I wanted to use on a consistent basis, like when someone didn't ask me to do something specific, I actually spent a lot of time kind of practicing letters of the scripts that I liked. That way you kind of memorize those letters, and then you don't have to keep consistently looking at an alphabet. Now, I thought this cookie cutter flip looked all right, but my husband could tell right away that this was actually a cotton candy cookie cutter. I'm going to be using it as a flower. Now, when I originally envisioned this, I imagined a flower with a leaf coming out, a singular leaf. I end up doing something a little bit different. I actually think this cutter would probably work better if you used it in the same manner as the cotton candy, but instead it was like a bouquet of flowers. But anyway, it does turn out in the end. And to create that flower, by the way, I just used a really simple petal tip that was just a straight edge, no tapering whatsoever, and I just kind of wiggled it around in a circle and ruffled it until I came up with something that I liked. And now I'm going in and using a leaf tip, and I'm kind of just pressing that in and then pulling back. Occasionally I do get a gap in there, and you might get a little gap with your leaf, especially if your icing is really, really thick. If that happens though, you can kind of press it together with like a cookie scribe, or even use the end of your piping bag. To create this peachy color, by the way, I added a very small amount of Chef Master Pink, and then I also added in a small amount of orange. Whenever you're doing pastel colors, you want to make sure that you use kind of like a little toothpick or something else to distribute the color, because chances are if you just try to squeeze it out, you'll add in too much. It is really hard to control the spouts of those colorants sometimes. This is my favorite part of decorating these cookies. I love adding in all of the little florals and, of course, my leaves. As soon as I add those leaves in, I just find it looks so much more full. I'm going in and I'm going to add the same type of ruffled flower onto this cookie. I really can't do any flat piping on that cookie, so that is exactly what it needs. I'm also going to cover up some of the imperfections that I had as I was doing some of this. Now, for one of these cookies, I actually was trying to do a demonstration on the difference in flooding techniques, so I really did need to add a lot of detail on top to cover up those imperfections. Yep, sometimes I do that. That is the magic of video making when you're on YouTube. Going in with a star tip on these engagement ring cookies, and we're doing a rosette here. So we start from the center and we work our way around. Now it really doesn't matter what direction that you start in, it just matters that you start in the center. I'm also making these simple 5-petal tipped flowers. Now I highly recommend that you go for a very small petal tip whenever you're doing this. If you're planning on doing a lot of flower work on cookies that are going to be 3D and pop out like that, definitely recommend that you invest in some small petal tips. And now it's time to actually paint the cookie. I debated about just leaving it white, but I think it does need this little hint of gold. So I'm taking some luster dust and I mixed it with vodka and I'm painting it in. But I decided to actually add some glitter in here as well. So I'm taking this brush and I'm packing it into that vodka while it's still wet. That way I know it's going to stick really, really well. You can do this a couple different ways. I could have pressed this in right when the icing was super, super wet. It would have used a lot of glitter, but it would have been fully glittered if that's the type of look that you would like. My cousin had requested that I make these cookies. She said, you can do whatever you want, just please make them engagement themed. And so I was super happy with the way that these turned out. Now let's get into the pricing. These are pretty straightforward, and of course it would be a custom order only as they're very, very specific. So it would be $4.75 to $6 Canadian each. The cookies range just a little bit, but of course there would be a dollar minimum implemented, meaning there would have to be a minimum spend of a certain amount of money. So that might be different for your bakery. Now let's get into the subscriber submission of the video. This is a very, very interesting cake. I've never seen that done on top like that before. Very cool. Go ahead and check them out on Instagram and don't forget to follow them as well. And if you want to be the next subscriber submission of the video, then please follow me at SD Bake Shop on Instagram, where you can either tag me in a photo or send me a photo of your favorite dessert creations. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you can be part of the Sweetie fam. Right now, I'm uploading weekly, so make sure you hit that notification bell so you know when I upload. Also, be sure to comment, request, or ask a question. I love hearing from you guys. Bye!